Hello, hi, welcome. Thank you so much for clicking on my video. My name is Sarah and this is Wicked Reading. So I am so excited to film this video. This is going to be my favorite books of 2022. I have only been filming videos for a few months now, so I haven't gotten to express how much I love most of these books. So I'm so excited to share these ones with you guys. I do have my top 11 and they are going to go in relative order from my least favorite of my favorite to my number one spot. The bottom few are kind of not totally set in stone, but my top 5 are 100% my top 5. I do have quite a mix of genres. I do have a lot of horror, I do have a memoir, I do have some literary fiction, and I do have some sci-fi. So I have quite an array of genres here, so let's go ahead and get into it. So the reason I did a top 11 is because I do have a memoir in one of them, and I know some people do their non-fictions separate from their fiction, so I just kind of had my one that would have been in my top 10 to begin with. So I just added on another book. So we have 10 fiction plus a non-fiction. So in my number 11 spot, I have The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. It explores these Blackfoot Native Americans who grew up on a reservation. It involves this group of 4 friends that do something in their younger days that pretty much just haunts them for the rest of their lives, and they are being haunted by an entity linked to what they did when they were younger. This book does a fantastic job of adding in the cultural element to this entity. The horror aspects of this book are so good. I was truly kind of terrified at moments. And there are moments of body horror and gore that really get quite brutal. It's not the bulk of this book, but those moments where gore is happening, it is very brutal. It is very kind of psychological, and how cultural ties can influence fear. Overall, it was a really great book. I love the themes explored. I will say the only thing that makes it towards the bottom of my list is Stephen Graham Jones has an extremely unique writing style, which for me personally was a little bit confusing at times. He just adds a lot of extra words and almost says things backwards that my brain has to work a little bit extra hard to follow what he's saying. But nonetheless, it's a great book and I highly recommend it. In my number 10 spot, I have A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. I read this very early on in 2022, but it has stuck with me since. It is so good. It takes on the whole trope of possession versus religious versus mental health. And I actually do enjoy those stories. I like possession stories, and I like when there's this lingering question of whether or not it's true possession or somebody is going through something that might need more medical intervention versus religious intervention. This is a really interesting take because it combines the idea that the parents are actually split on this. The mother thinks that it's much more she needs to go to therapy, see a psychiatrist, and the father is very tied to his religious beliefs and he believes that she needs an exorcism. And then it takes in this element of inviting a crew for a documentary to film this potential exorcism of this young girl. We follow through the lens of Mary, the younger sister, as we watch as her older sister, Marjorie, goes through this experience. I just really enjoyed the writing style. I thought that the combination of elements was really cool and really unique. I loved that we got this taste of a documentary mixed in there. And then there also is a mix of kind of this blog post, which at times wasn't totally my thing. So it is lower on my favorites, but nonetheless, I still really enjoy it. I still highly recommend it if you are interested in possession horror. I will say the ending of this book made me cry. But yeah, highly recommend this one. In my number 9 spot, I had Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. So this was so interesting. I had a fantastic time reading this story and I was really surprised because I had never before been into sci-fi. This is a sci-fi novel. I loved the writing style of this, and the structure of this book was so good and just keeps you engaged the whole time. So we open up the story with an astronaut waking up in a ship, and he has no memories of why he's there, who he is, or what's going on. He sees that there are 2 other astronauts there with him and they are actually dead. So now he has to figure out why exactly he's here, what his mission was, and what's going on. And The way that the background is given to you is just, again, so engaging. I totally love this story. I will say it is pretty heavy on the science, but it is given in such a way that is very easy to grasp, and it moves the plot forward. So it's not really sciencey just to be sciencey. So I will say you might have to be at least a little bit interested in science, a little bit intrigued on how like physics works, but I thought it was really cool. It takes on the whole idea of aliens and really kind of flips it on its head, and I just love what it did with the story. Super, super good. I do really want to now read The Martian by him, but so far this is the only book that I have read from him. But again, it was so good. I had such a great time. I laughed a lot, and there's a friendship that's explored in this book that is so great. Next up, in my number 8 spot, I have The Shining by Stephen King. This was actually my second Stephen King book ever. I did read Gerald's Game before this, but this book was so good. I get the hype with it. If somehow you don't know what the story is about, it has to do with this family, and the father, Jack Torrance, takes a job to oversee this hotel that's in a very remote location called the Overlook. Because over winter, it gets very, very blizzardy, hazardous. You cannot go to this area. So he is kind of the groundskeeper for the time that the hotel is out of business. So this family eventually is kind of trapped in this hotel because of the weather conditions. And from there, it seems like things are becoming a little bit strange. This book was so good, and I did not expect to have such a fantastic experience with it. It is so atmospheric, and the idea that they are being haunted or feel haunted by a location that they cannot escape, and it's not just like a physical thing that's like this doll is haunted. It's a whole entity manifesting within a single location. I don't know. I thought it was so good. Again, it was just very atmospheric and very haunting for me. And I actually did cry at the end, surprisingly. I did not expect to have such a reaction, but yes, I did cry at the end of this. So if I cried a book, it's definitely going to be up there for me. Now, I will say, go in knowing that this is very true to Stephen King's original writing style, which, because this is one of his earlier works, so he does use quite a lot of liberation in using some racial slurs that I really don't appreciate, and I almost wish that they would reprint this with a different take. With those aside, it is a very good book. Next up, I have My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This was my first and only Grady Hendrix book that I've read so far. I do really want to continue reading his works and read another book soon by him. I thought it was so fun. It is very much kind of more tongue-in-cheek, kind of campy. It takes place in like is it the 80s or like the 70s or 80s? It's one of those. But you can tell it definitely pulls from 70s, 80s kind of campy, corny horror. And I just loved the time period setting, and the horror aspects were actually really good in my opinion. There was a lot of like kind of body, I guess like bug, kind of physical horror that I thought was actually really great. It is also a exploration of a friendship that I thought was great, and I just love the vibes of this. I just had a great time reading this. We follow two girls, Abby and Gretchen, who have been friends for a very long time. One night they decide to go skinny dipping with some of their other friends, and Gretchen gets separated, and after that she is very different. We follow the story through the lens of Abby as she watches Gretchen change. Again, this is more on the possession side of horror, but again, it is also kind of more lighthearted, but there is some still horrific elements that I think worked really well, but it's not a totally scary book. It's just a lot of fun. It's very campy, and it's all about the vibes for this one. So for my number 6 book, I have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Now, this is one of those books that I feel like people either really liked or really did not like. You definitely have to be more into kind of a character-focused book. This follows a young woman named Addie, and she decides to make a deal with a spirit that answers her wish at night. After that, she is unable to make an impression on people. It's kind of hard to explain, but she will meet somebody, and then as soon as they turn around and look back at her, they have no memory of her. She is no longer able to be remembered by anybody. She cannot say her name. But then one day she goes into a bookstore, and the man at the cash register actually remembers her. It is so good. It mixes historical fiction with like romance, and then this idea of being linked to like a demonic being. But this is definitely one of those books for me that I will definitely be rereading probably time and time again. I just really connected with the story and these characters. Okay, next we're getting into my top 5. So actually 2 of my top 5 have already been shown on my channel, and I read them very close to the end of the year. So it's very cool that by the end of the year I was able to get 2 more favorites onto my list. But in the number 5 position is The Vessel by Adam Neville. This is actually a short story. It is only like 150 pages or so. It is a horror novella, and this book is so good. I recommend this if you are into kind of like ritualistic or folk type horror. It is so crazily atmospheric. It is actually like cinematic. It is a great experience. The dialogue is great because it actually is written as like a dialect from the UK. So I had such a fun time reading it because everybody had UK accents in my head, and it was great. And what this book was able to accomplish in such a short amount of pages is just so good. I loved how this overall ended. It is just a very, very haunting story, and it will probably stick with me for a very long time. I just really enjoyed this one. The premise of it is we are following our main character, Jess, who is a struggling mother trying to take care of her daughter while her kind of not so great ex is looming around and trying to get back into her life. Jess is struggling with money, and she takes a job as a caretaker to an old woman with dementia, and this old woman, Flo, does not really want her around, and then Jess starts noticing a lot of weird things around Flo's house, and from there the story really starts to take root. Since I read this, I definitely want to start reading more Adam Neville. I'm looking very forward to checking out his other works. In my number 4 position, I actually have a nonfiction, and that is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This book is so powerful. Everybody should read this book. It is fantastic. I actually listened to the audiobook version, and Chanel Miller herself reads it, which is so powerful, and I highly recommend doing that. So if you don't know, Chanel Miller was a victim of sexual assaults that happened in Stanford when she was passed out outside. The person who assaulted her is, well, quite frankly, a piece of shit and did not get what they deserved, in my opinion. But this book really just focuses on Chanel and what she had to go through, and it really submerses you in how traumatizing and how much a victim goes through, not even just in the original assault, but throughout the rest of their lives. And it's just, I get chills every time I even think about this book. I cried so much, but I also laughed. And Chanel is just such an amazing writer. The writing style was fantastic. She really accomplished something amazing with this book. It is very heavy, with the topic being on sexual assault, but it is such an important book. And if you have not read this book yet, you definitely should. I cannot say enough about this book. It is one that I will definitely have to continue to reread throughout my life because it's just so powerful. And then in my number 3 spot, I have A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. This book, the ACOTAR series in general, I did not expect to just fall so in love with that world, but this book in particular has its grasp on me. I love this book. I can't say too much because it's the sequel, but it does follow the ACOTAR series, and the romance in this book is so good. The exploration of trauma in this book is so good. I totally ate this book up. I think I read it in like 3 days, and that was while I was working too. So the fact that I was able to read this over 3 days during the week is insane. But this book is fantastic and left such an impression on me. Okay, and in my number 2 spot, I only read this book a few weeks ago. So I'm so glad I did because it made it to my number 2 spot of all year, and that is Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison. This book was so good. It really did something to me. So the premise of this book is we are following our main character, Rory, as she goes back to her hometown because her twin sister Scarlett is pregnant, and she's going to help her along the process in giving birth. And we open up this book by her getting a drink at a bar with an old friend, Ian, who has had a crush on her for a very long time. And on her way home, she actually hits something in her car. So she gets out of her car to investigate and she gets attacked by a werewolf. And from there, our journey really takes off. So I will say, this is much more, even though it's like a werewolf book, it is much more kind of cozy horror, much more character study. Do not expect like true horror or anything like that. The whole idea of the werewolf is, it's literal, but it's also metaphorical for a lot of other stuff. And it's really just a deep exploration of our main character. It explores her relationship with her mother, her relationship with her sister. There is a light romance in it that is just super cute, and I really enjoyed it because it didn't like take over the story. The whole story is just super well balanced. We also get to explore some trauma that our main character went through as a child, so there is that to keep in mind. But it was just, I loved this book. I totally ate it up. I thought it was so good, so fantastic. I loved the writing style. I really connected with the writing style. And it was also very funny. I was laughing a lot along the way, but it's also very deep. So this book is just so crazy well balanced for me. I just totally loved this book. So the time has come. My #1 book of 2022. And this is most definitely one of those books that you either love or absolutely hate. But obviously I loved it. And that is Bunny by Mona Awad. This book is like, you can't even explain it. It is so bizarre. The most I can say is that we follow our main character and she is in this like writing program, and she's in this class with 4 other girls who are actually kind of like a kind of group, like a clique, and they call themselves the Bunnies. And the Bunnies invite her over to study one night, and it becomes very bizarre and weird. So that's pretty much all I can say about that. This book was just so fantastic. The point of this book is that there's almost no point, but there's still kind of is point, but it's like so hard to explain. There's really no plot. It's truly 100% all vibes, so you definitely have to be into just vibes because there is no plot. There's like 2 or 3 plot points maybe at that. Is just, it did something to me. It changed me somehow. I ate this book up. I totally loved it. It is super self-aware, and I just loved the bizarre and at times horrific aspects to this book. I feel like this is one of those books that you will get something new out of it every time you reread it. And again, I really loved this book. I don't know. And again, there's really not much I can say about it because there's really not much to say. It's just an experience. You have to experience it, and from there you may or may not enjoy that experience, but it is an experience, and I had a great time, and this was by far my #1 book of the entire year. So that was all my favorite books that I read in 2022. Let me know some of your favorites of the year. I really had such a great time this year. It was the first year that I really got to get back into reading the way I used to after graduating school. So it's been quite a whirlwind trying to figure out exactly my reading taste. But as you can see, it's pretty variable. But I'm so excited and looking forward to everything I discovered in 2023. If you made it this far in this video, leave me a bunny emoji so that I know. And please subscribe if you're interested in more content, and like the video and all the YouTube things, okay? Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you guys on the next video. Bye!